Hi, and welcome back to the Pup and Away podcast. I am your host, Stephanie. You also may know me as Steph the Pro Dog Mom. I am a certified dog trainer, canine behaviorist, and canine nutritionist in San Antonio, Texas. I'm the very proud owner of Pup and Away, where we specialize in pet care with the behavioral edge. So in September of 2024, I went to the Association of Professional Dog Trainers, or known as APDT, their annual conference, and I heard Dr. Murphy speak about the neuroscience of adolescents or teenage dogs, and I was absolutely enthralled and inspired by this information. I actually got my start working with puppies specifically back in Houston in about 2013. And I started doing puppy classes and, private lessons. And I always just kind of laughed off what teenager stage was. That's my coffee, my dude. Sorry, I totally tried getting into my coffee. I kind of just laughed off adolescence of like, oh yeah, it's, pretty tricky time, but luckily you've been training your puppy. So just stay consistent and you'll get through it. And while consistency definitely is necessary, it turns out that there's so much more going on with that. You want to lie down with me? I don't know if for those of you guys who are watching, there's Mr. Telly again. Our dogs are actually really different beings at this time of adolescence, different from who they were as puppies and different from who they will be as adults. And right now is kind of the time for us to mold, I guess, what we want. I wouldn't say what we want, because that means that you can kind of make any sort of dog that you want. And obviously that foundation gets laid in puppy, early socialization. But we're also starting to find that just adolescence is it's just so different. Adolescence is this entire life stage that can kind of be passed over. And it's one of my recent goals to give adolescents the same time of day that we began to give puppies when puppy classes and early socialization became a thing. Way before I was even a dog trainer, dog training was kind of all lumped into no matter how old your dog is, we're kind of all doing the same thing. And then we branched out into different styles of training. And then we branched into, okay, puppies need a very particular kind of training and they need some specific things that we need to focus on. And now I'm hoping that the same thing happens with adolescents, because just like human teenagers, our dogs will have more intense emotions and more intense reactions because their bodies are still developing, but also undergoing a ton of changes. So what is a teenager? A teenager, for dogs at least, refers to the adolescent stage. You'll hear me say teenager, adolescence interchangeably, which is the period between puppyhood and full adulthood. This stage can definitely be challenging as dogs experience both physical and behavioral changes similar to human teenagers. Just like humans, there are a ton of factors and variables that go into adolescence. So let's talk about a couple of them. The first one, at least for dogs, is going to be size. In a very general sense, I like to say that dogs will start adolescence somewhere around 5 months and may continue this process until about 2 years of age. But when we break this down by size, we may be able to get a little more persistent, not the right word, concise with the ages that they go through. So for small breeds, these are dogs that are going to be about 20 pounds or under at adult age. So they will typically start their adolescence between 5 to 6 months and then complete it at around 12 months. And again, these are very general, approximate time frames. For medium breeds, these dogs are about 20 to 50 pounds whenever they are adults. They'll start their adolescence a little bit closer to 6 to 8 months, and they'll complete this at about 18 months. For large breeds, these are dogs who are going to be about 50 to 100 pounds whenever they're adults. Again, everything's going to slide a little bit later. Oh my gosh, my dogs are going to play now. They will start adolescence between 8 to 10 months, and then they will complete the cycle at about 2 years. And then for giant breeds, these dogs are the dogs that are going to be 100 pounds or more in adulthood. They'll start their adolescence closer to 10 to 14 months old. That's late, and won't complete it until about 3 months. So the bigger the breed, the longer you have a puppy, the further the further into their age, into that 1 year mark maybe is when you're going to start seeing the adolescent stage. And I think this is very interesting because when I'm thinking about like the giant breed puppies that I have right now, they are still very truly puppy adolescent, like I don't want to say puppy adolescents, but I do see some of those things changing. They're still the goofy, floppy puppy. It's just hard to think about it because they're so big and you're like, you're not a little puppy anymore. They act like it for sure. And I think that's one reason that talking about adolescence is super important for me, because us, the humans, the people who are raising these dogs, we start to get frustrated or punish our dogs because I've seen you do better than this. I've seen you do a sit. I've seen you do this. I've seen you be better than what you are now. And learning and behavior is not linear, and it's not something that just progresses, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. It's something that is variable and it's going to be all over the place. And that's why I really wanted to have this podcast and why I actually created a whole class specifically for teenagers, which I'm going to be shamelessly plugging throughout the entire episode. I wanted to air this episode about sometime this week because it lines up with when we're about to start our class and we are still taking signups as of the time that I'm recording this, obviously. So obviously we have these general approximate ages whenever our dogs are supposed to be starting adolescence and ending adolescence, but just like all of us, Sully, I'm about to say like the funniest joke in the episode and you decided to bark then. But just like all of us girls got our boobs and started our periods at different times, and all you boys got deeper voices at different times, obviously this will also vary for individual dogs as well. Another factor in terms of what is experienced at this time, and something that I think can also be observed in humans, he gave up on trying to play with Rishi, is gender, right? So male versus female. And so some studies suggest that male dogs have higher social motivation and arousal compared to females, which makes adolescents feel more extreme in terms of excitability and frustration tolerance. So sometimes dealing with an adolescent male can be a little bit more challenging than dealing with the adolescent female. And the more that I read stuff about, the gender differences between males and females, it sounds so much like what humans may experience. I've never raised teenagers. I don't have human children, but I've been a teenager myself, and my nephews right now are definitely in that teenager stage, and they're awesome kids. And I think this is probably a little bit more my experience from, having friends as teenagers who were teenagers. And then of course in movies, you see the guys doing like the more dangerous stuff. This is when they're going to start to experiment with staying out late, taking the car, more risk-taking behaviors. And you're going to start to see the female kids being more like bitchy and moody towards their parents. And a lot of that stuff is what is also seen in puppies as well. So very interesting, and hoping not to anthropomorphize any of that, but just to kind of give you some context as to how to understand it. So what are some things that you, the pet parent, might observe at this time? You might find that your dog seems to forget what they once knew. This is like telltale sign number 1. So simple commands like sit, stay, and come, things that your puppy learned in puppy classes and once performed really well, are now sloppy and not as consistent as they were once before. Your dog is now easily or more easily distracted. So maybe your puppy's always been a little bit distracted because they're a puppy and ooh, squirrel, but now you're noticing it even more so, or even things that were once not distracting are now distracting. So it seems like your dog literally can't focus on anything, especially you, in distracting environments. Like they will literally watch a leaf blow by instead of listening to you when you have a treat in your hand. So good thing your dog doesn't have middle fingers, because this is definitely where your dog would be giving those up left and right, because they don't give a hoot about you. They don't give a hoot about you, but again, you're like really low on the totem pole as far as their focus goes. Your dog may have a tendency to be overly excited, and this can manifest in a variety of different ways depending on how your dog is going through adolescence. But here are just a couple of examples. Your dog can get way too excited when they see someone they love and they have a hard time controlling themselves. So they're just beside themselves or jumping up all over the place. They're pulling on clothes. Maybe they're peeing themselves. They're knocking things down to get to the person. They're choking themselves on leash. Some of these things sound a little bit like puppyhood because they haven't learned how to say hello to a dog, or excuse me, to a person, or also to a dog. But you're noticing that like it's just more like wild, and part of you is like, well, yeah, because they're bigger, but also part of it is because of all the different changes that they're going through that we'll talk about in just a second. Your dog might pull towards or get frustrated when they can't reach a dog or another person that they see when they're out on the walk. So this is where reactivity behavior can start, frustration can start to build up because I want to go play with that puppy and I can't, right? So we get these temper tantrums that start off usually as just like, I want to go play, and then frustration happens, and then you're the worst mom ever, I hate you because you won't let me play. Again, anthropomorphizing, so that way you can kind of understand what is going on, because maybe you've experienced that when you're a teenager or have teenagers, or know someone that is a teenager. Your dog doesn't understand how to be neutral around exciting things and thinks that they must absolutely interact with everything that they desire to interact with. We talked a little bit about this and what is proper puppy socialization, because in puppy socialization, we're trying to expose our dogs and teach them that everything is fun. But in teaching them that everything is fun, they want to interact with everything that's fun, right? Because puppies want to be where the party is. So this has a little bit to do with how you handle puppy socialization. But at the same time, even if your puppy socialization was fantastic and you worked on remaining neutral and being calm around new people and dogs, but still putting a positive spin on things, you will still start to see that your dog is going to experience these things in their adolescence. Your dog has more over the top or out of proportion reactions to things. So maybe something like spook them, right? And instead of just going, ooh, that was scary, they have a huge reaction to something. That's a coping skill that we'll be talking about in just a little bit. So those are just different things. And you might see changes in behaviors despite all the puppy socialization that you did. You notice that your dog can be spooky or fearful of things that have always been there. You might see more reactive behaviors start to surface at this time. Again, even though your dog was fantastically socialized to people and dogs, now all of a sudden they're becoming reactive. Dogs may start to become more selective to meeting other dogs or people when they once wanted to meet everybody. This is something that we see a lot in doggy daycare. We have the younger dogs who can't make an enemy, like they're friends with everybody. And of course, play style has to go into, is this dog a proper fit for daycare? But then they start to be selective in the types of dogs that they want to meet and the types of dogs that they want to play with. And this is usually, for me, in my experience, it happens a little bit further into adolescence. Like this isn't one of the first things that you'll see at the beginning of adolescence, but maybe once life experiences have taught them to be selective. I'm not too sure. But again, this is something that I see a little bit later in adolescence and not so much in the very beginning. Like I said before, teens are different individuals than who they were when they were puppies and different from who they will be as adults. Their bodies are going through it, and these things deserve specific considerations and training plans, again, which is why I created my Tenacious Teens class. So let's talk about some of those differences that your puppies are going through. We talked about, a little while ago, we talked about things that you, the pet parent, can see and observe, but now let's talk about what is actually going on inside that you're not understanding, because you understanding this will help you see your puppy in a completely different light. So the first one, hormonal changes. Just like humans, there is a change in our dog's hormones at this time. Males will go through what's called their testosterone flood, so they'll have their first testosterone flood, and females may experience their first heat cycle. Again, just like humans, all us girls got our periods at different times. Same thing's going to happen with your males and females. Not with periods for males, obviously, but you know what I'm trying to get at. Around 5 to 12 months, intact dogs may experience a surge in testosterone, so this is their testosterone flood, up to 5 to 7 times higher than in adulthood. So again, we're seeing things that are happening only in teenager land that's not happening in adults. Like if your male dog is always intact, there's always going to be some sort of level of testosterone there. But it's called a flood for a reason. And it doesn't just mean like, oh yeah, my dog's getting their testosterone. No, it is a flood. It is a tsunami. It is, we are destroying the city because everyone's house is underwater at this moment, because it is 5 to 7 times higher than what that dog is going to have in their system in adulthood. So this can lead to increased independence. We see a lot of marking, lifting legs start at this time, mounting, so humping. At adolescent time, we talked a little bit before in a couple of other episodes that humping can be a lot of other different things besides just sexual behavior. But when I'm seeing humping at this stage in daycare and it's coupled with a couple of other things, like this dog is hyper focused on a specific dog. The dog's usually female, doesn't always have to be female, but is usually female. That dog also cannot get their nose out of like the booty area of that dog. That usually means something more testosterone driven and not just I'm overstimulated and I don't know how to cope. So that's what mounting is in this sense. Risk taking and selective hearing when compared to females. So again, the male teenagers are going through it a little bit more than the females, or it just may be a little bit more difficult for pet parents to deal with. Even neuter males may still show some of these behaviors due to brain development, which we'll talk about in just a second, though it possibly may be to a lesser degree because they also don't have that surge of hormones. So let's talk about brain development and neuroscience, because for teenagers, their brains are literally still developing. The prefrontal cortex, this is responsible for impulse control, problem solving, and decision making, is still maturing. It's still developing during adolescence. This means that adolescent dogs struggle with self-regulation and they are more likely to make impulsive choices like ignoring commands, jumping up on people, chasing objects, having that prey drive, running out the door, not being able to hold a sit stay as well as they once did as puppies. You get the gist. Studies suggest that the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until around 2 to 3 years of age, with larger breeds taking, again, a little bit longer, closer to that 3 years. So again, that's kind of why in a general sense, I say that if our dogs starts at 5 months, the adolescence starts at 5 months and ends at about 2 years, that's because for me, that's when the prefrontal cortex is like, I'm missing and I don't know how to operate. But the prefrontal cortex isn't the only system that's still developing. The limbic system is overreactive. So the prefrontal cortex is a little bit slow. The limbic system is overactive. The limbic system governs emotions and fear responses. It develops before the prefrontal cortex, making adolescent dogs more reactive and emotionally driven. Again, just like in teenagers, this is where you see the big moody outburst. I hate you, mom. Like, they say all these crazy things. That's your kid being reactive and they're very emotional. So this can explain, let's bring it back to dogs. This can explain why dogs that seem confident as puppies may suddenly develop fear periods, which we've talked a lot about in the past, or show heightened sensitivity to stimuli that they previously ignore. They're more aware of different things. They're exploring things more. They're taking these risks. And again, coping strategies we'll talk about in just a second are being played around with. The adolescent brain undergoes synaptic pruning, and this is a process where unused neural connections are eliminated to make the brain more efficient. One great example of synaptic pruning, Sully was about 2 months, like he was maybe like 2.5 months old when he met my nephew, who at the time was, like 2 years old. And I have pictures. I've talked about this before. So if this sounds familiar, I'm sorry. But I have pictures of them playing together. And so I was like, check, like Sully met a kid. That's amazing. And this was even before I was a dog trainer and before I knew what puppy socialization was. So that wasn't even really my intention. I just happened to be home for Christmas. And I went back to school in College Station, and Sully didn't meet a kid for a very long time. So his little neurons, his little synapses, those neural connectivity things, that in the brain keep the learning alive and the knowledge there in the brain, it started to weaken, right? Because he wasn't being exposed to kids often. So that neural connection started to weaken and he eventually died. The brain was like, I don't need this. There's so much other things going on. Let's make room for other information. So now Sully absolutely hates children. And it's been this, like, I wouldn't say a joke in the family, but kind of a joke in the family. My sisters call him Hannibal Lecter because he will bite a child. Never caused any harm, but he just has really big feelings about it. And I know that I can manage it really well to not really have him around kids that much. So that is an example of synaptic pruning there. So this is why consistent training is absolutely critical, because behaviors that are reinforced during this time will stick. And that's important to know too, because sometimes behaviors that we don't want to stick at this time are going to stick, while those that are neglected may fade. So if you stopped working on that rollover that you did in puppy class, that's going to go away pretty quickly. Our puppies are also starting to perceive the world around them differently. I want you to pay attention to this, because this is, for me, was a very interesting concept about all the different things that they're perceiving in the world, stimuli, and how it's just absolutely shaping whatever it is that you're seeing as their pet parent. So the first one is they have an increased sensitivity to punishment. So this means that things that weren't typically considered punishment might now be considered punishment. This can be something as simple as like tactile praise. Maybe your puppy used to love being pet all over the place and that made them really excited, so it was a good reward method for you. But now you're noticing that your dog kind of shies away from your hand a little bit. We also see a decreased sensitivity to reward. The things that they once found rewarding might no longer be rewarding, and if we do not switch rewards, this can decrease behaviors once taught. So this is where if you have a dog who, as a puppy, they really loved, gentle praise and tactile praise and, being pet all over when they did something right, and now your dog is like, oh, I don't like that too much anymore. If you continue to do that because you used to like this, that can now not be as rewardable as it was once before. It might now be seen as a punishment, and now it is going to be considered a negative consequence to punishment, or a negative consequence to that behavior, and thus that behavior will happen a little bit less. So you need to make sure that you're switching your reward systems if you're noticing that your dog is not loving that thing that they once loved. Here's more things about this. Recovery takes twice as long. So recovery to stress, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So we have cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and adrenaline are twice as high, and they linger longer in adolescence. So this really means that decompression, our dogs being able to come back down to baseline, is more important. And there's usually two different things that we can do. There's passive decompression, things like licking or napping, or there's active decompression, going for a run, tearing or ripping things up. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So in general, when hormones are high, there's less areas of the brain that are functioning. We're creating a dog that is just more sensitive. The nervous system is overstimulated and ringing all the internal alarms if they're not given a proper way to decompress and get back to hormonal baseline, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. So we're also going to see changes in the microbiome as well. You guys know that I love to talk about the microbiome. How well that change is regulated at this time is going to determine the diversity of the microbiome in adulthood. We are planting the seeds of a well-diverse and healthy gut, or a gut that is going to be in dysbiosis. So making sure that we are tending to those needs at this time is really important. So you remember how challenging your teenagers were. So I know you were wondering, okay, Steph, how the heck can I support my teenage dog? Like, I don't want them to go through what I went through. It's going to happen. So a couple of things that you can do as a pet parent to support your dog at this adolescence is, the first one is understanding their genetics. And what those breed propensities might be allowing. So for example, we have working breeds. This can be dogs like Border Collies or Malinois. They're going to tend to have a higher mental and physical needs now than during adolescence than in adulthood. In guardian breeds like Great Pyrenees and Rottweilers, you may start to see a development of protective instincts at this time. So again, those things you need to know what your dog is bred for and know that those behaviors will be popping up at this time. And that doesn't mean that, like that's just their breed, it's fine. That doesn't mean that we're going to excuse it and not worry about it, but instead we are going to understand it and realize like, my shepherd is more nippy now because that's what they're bred to do. So you have an understanding about it, and then what can you do to help them maybe nip a little bit less? You also, I love this one, giving your dog experience-dependent neuroplasticity. It just sounds so fancy. But basically what that means is you must experience arousal to learn how to deal with the arousal. So create instances where there's an awareness, there's an arousal, and then work techniques to see what works best for your individual dog. Just like all of us have different ways to deal with stress, some of us may consume alcohol more, binge eat. Some of us might like to just rot on the couch. Some of us might like to go for a run, smash things, different things like that. Your dog is going to have their preferred ways to deal with stress as well. So shameless plug, here's another one. This is what our Tenacious Teens class is all about. It is about creating little moments where your dog is aroused and then testing and teaching these different techniques to operate through that stress and that arousal. So then that way we can start to increase the distraction level, the arousal level, and now you have things in your toolbox to take out to the real world to help your dog deal with that real life stress and arousal. So I'm going to be dropping even more little teases and hints about this brand new class because I am really excited about it. And I hope that if you do have a teenager that you will find us and sign up for this class, and it won't be the first time that we offer it, hopefully. So make sure you keep finding us. So health and welfare, right, is another way that you can support your dogs. Our dogs need to be healthy, and the body must not be in a state of dysbiosis, and it needs to be properly working so that way it can regulate and function. Most of the other points that I'm going to be making at this time are going to be examples of how to maintain this health and welfare. So sleep, I cannot express the importance of sleep. We have talked a ton about how dogs sleep a lot, so usually about 12 to 14 hours for adults, but even more so for puppies and for seniors. But it's not just the quantity of sleep that's important, it's the quality of sleep that is absolutely the most important here. Sleep that is constantly interrupted, whether during the day, like naps, or at night, so like their actual resting time, interrupts the REM cycle. So longer bouts of sleep that are interrupted is more detrimental than shorter bouts of sleep that are uninterrupted. So it's better to have a short, deep, good nap that allows for the body to complete the REM cycle than to have a long sleep that you're waking up every few, whatever it is, right? The quality of the sleep is the most important. The brain also it does some really cool things while we're sleeping, for us and for our dogs. It literally processes everything that happened that day, things that were learned, and it stores it better. So naps after a study session for students, for humans, or after a training session for dogs is super important because that's your brain's way of processing and storing information more efficiently. This is another reason why kennel training is so important whenever you have a young puppy. The kennel can be used to give your dog good quality sleep in the other room away from you because you may accidentally be causing disruptions in your dog's sleep, right? If me and my kiddos, me and my two schnauzers are hanging out on the couch watching, I'm watching Netflix and they're snoozing, but I want to get up and get some water, guess what? I just disrupted their nap. So it's important for puppies who are growing, adolescents who are who are still growing and going through all of this, that their naps, their sleeps are not disrupted by the noises you make, by the moves that you make. So it's important for you to consider giving them these rest cycles, maybe more, but also in an area where they can actually fully be at peace. The next one is pain. Most dogs are experiencing some sort of level of pain already from an early age, from like 1.5 to 2 years. It's really sad. Obviously, these medical conditions need to be addressed, but they will put more stress on the body, on the physical body, and leave your dog feeling more irritable and less capable of dealing with stress. And this can be a variety of different things, right? If your dog just got inoculated, they just got their vaccinations, they might be showing some sort of symptoms or not feeling well because their immune system's rampant at that moment. That can be an issue. If your dog's gut microbiome is already messed up, or they usually have some sort of diarrhea or constipation, something's going on there. So we need to make sure that everything is healthy. So another one, the microbiome. You guys know that I love to talk about the gut microbiome and how important it is to learning and to stress management as well. So we talked about how their needs in the microbiome are changing. So poor diets of highly processed foods. This is traditionally what kibbles are and what the majority of dogs are eating. They are not creating the ideal gut to fight gut inflammation, to fight systemic inflammation, thus decreasing stress regulation, because the body is just too busy trying to get to its regular baseline to get to homeostasis, that it's not having the opportunity to check the other boxes of stress regulation. Another thing to consider are medications and environmental exposures. I'm a very crunchy person, and if you don't know what that means, I basically try to limit my exposure to chemicals, not just for me and my safety, but for my dogs as well. So from a personal standpoint, like the personal products that I use, things like shampoos, my makeup, to household cleaners that I use and what I treat my lawn with, all of those are important decisions for you to be considering, because these things are important for us, and even more so for our dogs who are exposed to monthly parasite treatments. I haven't really talked about my stance on things like flea prevention and heartworm prevention, because I will probably get myself into trouble with somebody. But those are chemicals, those are pesticides that we're putting on and in our dogs on a monthly basis. If you treat your lawn for weeds, most likely that's glyphosate. It's killing things that are out in the yard. It's going to be killing things in your dog's gut microbiome. Our dogs walk on those chemically treated lawns, and then they lick their feet or they eat the grass, right? So they're constantly being inundated with even more chemicals than we are, and their systems are a little bit, in my opinion, more sensitive. They're constantly eating foods that are sprayed and preserved with all sorts of chemicals, because that's just typically what needs to happen in order for kibbles to stay shelf stable and to be able to be on the shelves for years. These chemicals are creating an inflamed environment within our dogs. So can we limit their exposure? Or can we help our dogs by giving them some sort of aid in detoxing by giving them things like milk thistle to support their liver in a detoxing role? Okay, so my last one that we'll talk about before we get into even more stuff is stress and arousal management. Obviously, the goal is to help our dogs learn to deal with stress and arousal. Like we said earlier, they must experience stress and arousal and learn how to deal with it in a proper way. But we also need to consider management techniques to help decrease unavoidable stress. In other words, if you can't be available to help your dog learn and cope through a situation, is there something that you can do to decrease or eliminate the exposure? And some of the stuff you can listen to our previous podcast episode when we talked about holistic ways to deal with stress. So, but a couple of other things too, like example, if you want to have a party, but your dog is now becoming a little bit selective with people, can you kennel them in a different room and keep them safe with some distance? Can you send them to their favorite boarding spot, or have a pet sitter take them for the evening, or have your parents watch them, or whatever, so that way you can enjoy your party but not expose your dog to stress? Because what you don't want to do is have your dog having a slight panic attack and not knowing how to cope with anything, or trying things, which again we'll talk about in just a second, because you're too busy being the great host or hostess that you are, and your dog is struggle bussing. That is not the right thing to do there, because now let's talk about coping strategies. I really want to focus on allowing our dogs to experience arousal. So again, they may learn to cope with the arousal and then build the lifelong ability and the neuroplasticity over time. So anytime your dog is experiencing stress or arousal, they are going to be trying different coping mechanisms and how they're going to deal with this sort of stress. How are they going to make the stress less? How are they going to diffuse the situation? How are they just going to get the space that they want? Many things are tested at this time, many coping techniques are tested at this time, and unfortunately, the bigger, scarier ones are the ones that are going to quote unquote win and be more favored and performed more by your dog. So let's talk about this, because again, this is something that starts a little bit in that puppy socialization time, but now that your dog is starting to become more selective, they're not loving certain experiences like they once were. A lot of people's mentalities are, they used to love this, it's okay, or I just have to get, like, so for example, if your dog's becoming selective to meeting people, they just have to get over it. So I'm just going to pick up my dog and shove him in somebody else's arms, or I'm just going to drag my puppy on over to meet this person because this person looks like a lot of fun. What's happening is your dog is already trying out coping mechanisms at this time. They're showing you that they're already nervous because you've noticed it because you just said they once used to like this more than what they currently do. What are those things that you're seeing? So an example of this can be like your dog is doing some lip licks, your dog is yawning, your dog is giving a whale eye and turning away, your dog is literally taking steps backwards away from that person, your dog is hiding behind you. Those are coping mechanisms. Those are the easy ones. And because we're so, be nice, go meet people, it's gonna be okay, we ignore those coping mechanisms. We shove our puppy forward. We shove our puppy in the arms of a stranger. So we ignored those things. And then your puppy's like, shit, I must do something bigger. Let me try something else. So they start to growl. They start to snap. They start to bite. And those things are the ones that we're going to pay attention to more because these are dangerous. And sometimes even still, pet parents will bop their puppy on the nose. No, stop it. Be nice. Right? That's not what's going on. Your dog is literally asking for help and you're ignoring it or punishing it. So now these things are going to happen sooner and bigger. So this is what I mean by these coping. Okay, so then obviously one day, your dog finally like just snaps at that person's face or whatever the case may be. I'm giving a really big extreme example. And then the person steps away from the puppy. You stop finally giving your dog to strangers. And now your puppy's learned, oh, it's the really big, quote unquote, scary things that I do that get me the comfort, that defuse the situation to bring me comfort. Let me keep doing that because that is what seems to work. Not the soft lip licking, the yawning. That just got me more into trouble. It's the bigger things that are going to keep me safe. So at this stage, the dog is learning how to deal with stress and how to self-regulate through questionable, unpredictable, and maybe already known to be scary situations. So socialization at this time is absolutely critical. It's insane because we went from happy-go-lucky, my puppy gets to meet everything and is having so much fun, to my dog is starting to not like this as much, but society tells me that I need to have a good puppy who loves to meet everyone, so let me just keep doing what I was doing. No, your dog's going through changes and we need to change the strategy in which we are operating in. All right, for those of you who are watching this, excuse my outfit change. I had to get closer to get ready for work, so I changed. So what is stress and how does it affect the body and lead to chronic behaviors? So stress is any sort of event that is going to cause your nervous system to ignite or to fire. And in our nervous system, we have two different halves, I guess. We have the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight. And the way that I remember this is S. Sympathetic is also sensitive. So this is going to be all the different things. You're going to have your cortisol, your adrenaline pump up, your heart rate is going to go up, your breathing might become quicker. This is the things that, these are physical responses to those things firing off because your body, again, is in that fight or flight mode. So we need to be ready to fight or flight. Then you have your parasympathetic nervous system. The way I remember this is parasympathetic, parachute. It slows things down. So this is things that is known as the rest and digest section, or the rest and digest portion of your nervous system. This is when your body is getting back to homeostasis. This is when your breathing starts to become more regulated. Your heart rate starts to get down to its baseline, your hormones also decrease and get to that baseline, you're back into homeostasis. So we talk about a stress cycle. A stress cycle is when your dog experiences stress, their sympathetic nervous system ignites and fires. They do their coping mechanisms or whatever it is, the event stops, and then they start to decompress. They start to get back into their parasympathetic nervous system, back into that rest and digest, and the stress cycle is complete. And the stress cycle can vary between individuals, and it can also vary upon the triggers. So if you're constantly experiencing a lot of maybe small stresses, your body is having, it starts to creep up into that sympathetic. The event stops, it starts to slow down and almost reach baseline, but then another thing happens. So you're constantly just driving like this up and down, up and down, up and down of emotions. Or maybe you experience a really big stressor. So that sympathetic, if you're looking at it from like, a scale or a spectrum, you're all the way on one side. It's going to take a lot longer for you to slide to the opposite side of that spectrum to get down to your baseline. So depending on the trigger, it can be very different. A same individual or two different individuals might experience the same stressor, be stressed by it differently, and then regulate differently from it. And when you don't have the ability to reach back down to your parasympathetic nervous system, when you don't have a chance to reach back into baseline, this is what's called being stuck in a stress state, because your sympathetic nervous system is overfiring, it's overworking, it's not having a chance to calm down. Your body, for whatever, it's just not dealing with the stress well. And my social media loves to tell me that I might be stuck in a stress state myself, simply because as a business owner, I've got a lot of different stresses that I'm working through on a regular basis. So it's really important to make sure that you and your dog are dealing with your stress. There's also a lot of really interesting information that says that your stress level can definitely be affecting your dog and how they're coping with stress. So if you're having a very stressful moment, it's not only important for you personally to figure out how to deal with that stress, but it's also going to help your dogs out. And if you're like me, I'm more willing to do stuff knowing that it's going to benefit my dogs. So building in predictability and patterns to make things less stressful is really what the Tenacious Teens class is about. Because again, stress, arousal, and stress isn't always bad, right? Stress can be a fun, good thing. If your dog loves to go to daycare and have fun with their friends, that puts stress on the nervous system because we're excited, we're aroused, we're playing, we are physically active, we're having the time of our life. That is, even though it's good, still fits further on the spectrum and not quite there in the middle. So I used to have a client who, they have like not an old dog, but the dog, when you look at him very closely, you're like, oh, something's going on there. This is over arousal. They once said, oh, this is so great because when he goes home, he sleeps for 2 days. Us as pet parents, we love that, right? Because, oh, cool, I don't have to, my dog's tired. This is the best thing ever because society tells us it's normalized that a tired dog is a good dog. But when you look at what's actually going on with that dog needs to sleep for 2 days to get back to baseline. That means that this dog is not thriving. That means that this dog may not be having fun because it should not take 2 days for your dog to get back to baseline unless you have a dog who is older. So for example, Sully's 15. When he goes to daycare, the next day he's daycare hungover because he's an older man and he's tired and it takes more for his body to get back to that baseline. But for a regular 2-year-old dog, that's too much. So again, stress doesn't always have to be a bad thing. Arousal isn't always a bad thing, but a lot of whenever we're seeing the behaviors that cause concern for us, the pet parent, these are usually going to be in moments that are not exciting and a little bit scary. So for example, when guests come over, there's unpredictability there because ding dong, the doorbell rings. That's my first sign that something's going to happen. That portal opens. And if I'm a dog who's dog selective, I have no idea once on the opposite side of that door, a person's gonna come in, and I already need to be ready, because if I don't like that person, all the other coping mechanisms that I once tried are not working. So I already gotta start barking. I already gotta start putting on a really big display, because if that door opens and it's not somebody I like, I need to make sure that I want them to know that they need to leave me alone. This is all the stuff that is being planted whenever we're going into adolescence. So can we build predictability by doing things like pattern games to increase focus, to increase what is going on, for your dog to know, like, okay, when the doorbell rings, this is my job, this is what I'm gonna do. Even though if that door opens and it is someone that I don't like, I know that if I stay here at my place bed, or this isn't going to make any sense because I haven't talked about it, if I, don't move to the next bowl, different things like that, we're also giving them a little bit of agency in how they're going to interact with that moment. So pattern games to increase focus, pattern games to increase predictability are super important. Those are things that we focus on in our Tenacious Teens class. Building in decompression to help complete the stress cycle. This one is super duper important. Again, there are active and passive ways to decompress for people. An active thing might be going for a run, working out. For me, if I had a stressful day, I'll tell my my personal trainer, like, I need to slam some battle ropes. I need to slam some med balls today. So that's really active. A more passive something might be reading a book, being creative, painting, maybe sometimes rotting on the couch, right? Yoga, meditating, different things like that. Those are more in the people realm. For dogs, active may be, again, going for a walk, going for a run, tearing things up, like ripping things, shredding things. People are always like, my dog tears up stuff. Like, that could be something that we need to address. Like, when is your dog tearing up stuff? If your dog goes for a walk and is kind of, reactive, and they come back and they just shred something, that's a way that your dog is decompressing. Passive ways that your dog might be decompressing is a nap, could be licking, could be, a massage or something like that you're giving them if they like those sorts of things. So it's important to know what your dog likes to do and which one of those things brings the most decompression for your dog, so that way you can be smart and efficient in those things that you're offering. A tricky thing to do is how to tell if the stress cycle is complete. Because again, like I just said, every individual is dealing with it differently. Even the one dog might be having a harder time dealing with a specific trigger over another one. So I'll kind of give you an example. Rishi loves to go outside. And so when I start walking towards the front door, she's like, yeah, we're going to go outside. She starts hopping around. She starts jumping. She starts barking. And I'm not going to lie, I have placated and reinforced this behavior because my husband works from home. And if she continues to go through that party stage, it's noisy and it's not good for his work. So I placate, I reinforce, I just open up the door and she goes outside. So because she's already in this amped up state, she runs down those stairs, she goes across around the house, because our back door is at the side of our house. And she's already hackles up. That doesn't mean aggressive. It just means I'm aroused. And then say, for example, the neighbor's dogs are also outside. Oh, Lordy, she is going to be running up and down that fence line. She's going to be barking. She is a bit of a fence fighter with those guys. And so here I come walking down the stairs, and I'm trying to block her from the fence. And she's like, screw you, Mom. I don't care what you have to say. I am doing this. So I'm halfway chasing her. She starts to coming to me, and she's like, nah, just kidding. And then she goes around me and she's barking some more. When I have the opportunity to finally get her away from the fence, sometimes I have to pick her up. She is she's breathing heavy, she's breathing deep. Her hair on her back is standing up from the tip of her skull to mid back. She's she's whining, she is shaking. This is the height of this girl's stress cycle. Bring her inside. Maybe she comes inside and she shakes off, but it's very interesting because normally she shakes off and doesn't make a noise. And after this moment, she'll shake off and and make a noise while she's doing it. I'm like, okay, you're starting to calm down, but you're still pretty elevated. Finally, I can hear her breath start to slow down. If I were to check her heart rate, maybe it's still elevated, but it's coming back down. Maybe the hair on the back of her neck is starting to go down just a bit. Maybe she's sitting, but she's still, very alert. So she's moving closer to a state of completing that stress cycle, but she's still alert. So alert that if she hears something, she might bark at it, right? So I know that you haven't completed your stress cycle yet until she's laying down, her breathing has calmed down, her heart rate is normal, and if she does hear something, she's not going to react to it. That's how I know she's completed a stress cycle. Depending on how long she was living in that stress, or depending on, if she were to experience something much bigger, it might take her a little bit longer to get through this. But it's up to you as your dog's pet parent to understand when that stress cycle is complete. Again, this can be where we get stuck into stress states because we're not having a chance to complete that stress cycle. And that can, of course, lead to other things like more inflammation and things like that. So your dog's ability to do this relies, to complete the stress cycle, to have this coping mechanism, really relies on more than just training and games. It really does mean that you are aware of what's going on. You're understanding that your dog isn't being a bad dog to be a dick. Your dog is going through very big changes, and they're having a hard time just knowing how to regulate and, to cope through all of those different things. So again, this is another shameless plug. This is why I made the Tenacious Teens class. I learned about it and kind of started really researching a little bit more about it in September of 2023. And here we are, September, October, November, December, January, 5 months later. And I'm just now having the opportunity to put together a class, because once I started to know these things, the more I started to recognize it and see it in my clients, my private lesson clients, in my group class clients, in my daycare as well. There's a very big reason why daycares are full of adolescent dogs, right? Because they've got the most energy. Like we said before, like they need this time they need the most. They're just the most energetic beings at this moment. But when you're putting your dog into a state of over-arousal for long periods of time, while on top of that, they also may be becoming selective and practicing these coping mechanisms that a lot of daycares don't have really well-trained people to understand what proper play is, what stress signals are, different things like that. You could be, for now, it's doing you a great job because you get to have a tired dog, but long term, what is it doing for your dog? Are you creating a dog who has not the most appropriate coping mechanisms? Are you building a dog who is going to be more in a stress state? And this is another reason why, even though we do daycare 5 days a week, we don't allow for dogs to come 5 days a week, because for traditional people, right, they're out of the house for 5 days and then they're home for 2 days. So your dog is constantly being aroused. They're constantly being stimulated in some sort of way if they come to daycare for 5 days and then they're home with you when you're taking them to the farmer's market or hikes and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's great for your dog to have a really enriched life, but it's just as important for you to make sure that your dog is getting proper sleep, proper rest, because that's when their body is also just repairing and getting back to homeostasis. When you don't take the time to have structured naps, to have alone time, to have quiet time, to teach your dog how to learn how to self-regulate in those moments, you're building a dog that doesn't know how to deal with that, who is constantly in that frantic, neurotic stress state. And I know that's not what you want for your dogs. And some breeds can be a little bit more likely to develop these sorts of skills. So for example, like my working breeds who always needed to do something, they're more likely to be like this because that's what they're bred to work. But again, we want to make sure that we're always doing things still even on the spectrum. We don't want to overstimulate. We don't want to overtire because that's not giving the body the right things that it needs to be here in the middle. So again, like that client that I was talking about, who he was constantly overstimulated in daycare, and like when you watch him, he's just like ping-ponging back and forth from different things. He doesn't know what to not focus on. And then he's sleeping for 2 days. That is not the healthiest thing for your dog. We want to be able to give them enrichment and stimulation that is going to be more baseline and kind of take them off a little bit, that center part of the spectrum, and not so much all the way on the opposite end. So then that way they have a better chance to regulate, and they don't have to go all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum to finally give their body what they need to rest. So like I said, if you are in San Antonio and you have a teenager dog and you're like, oh my God, a lot of these things make so much sense. How do I help my dog? I would love for you to join our Tenacious Teen class. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be playing a lot of games. I like to tell people that this is not a basic manner course. We are not going to be working on sit stays and down stays and different things like that. But we're going to be creating and playing games and exercises, again, to give your dog a little bit of exposure to that arousal and to give your dog an opportunity to practice better coping mechanisms. And of course, to educate you to know what to look for in that moment. But you did the first step and you listened to this podcast. So I thank you guys so much.
Now, that might be the end of the episode, but the fun doesn't have to stop here. Follow us on social media. I'd love to connect with you. We have quite a few social media platforms. For nutrition and holistic pet care tips, follow me on TikTok and Instagram at Steph the Pro Dog Mom. You can find fun training tips on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Pup Pup and Away SA. If you're in San Antonio and you want to bring your dog to us for boarding, training, socialization, and nutrition, come find us. But if you're not in San Antonio, we do training and nutrition sessions virtually. Yes, they can be just as effective, I promise. Please rate, review, and subscribe to my podcast on whatever platform you listen on. And please, please, please share with a friend. The positive reinforcement of knowing people actually listen to this and find it valuable helps motivate me to keep on recording. We'll see you guys at the next episode.